My daughter-in-law did not raise her voice when she threw me out into the snow, and somehow that made it colder. She stood in the warm yellow light of my own front doorway with one hand on the brass knob and the other resting on my suitcase, the small blue one Harold and I used to take to Mackinac Island every summer. "You have stayed here long enough, Maggie," Claire said, as if she were discussing a coat left too long in a closet. "Andrew and I need our home back." Behind her, my son stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, staring at the rug instead of at me. The snow was coming down over Traverse City in thick, quiet sheets, covering the porch steps, the driveway, and the little stone path Harold had laid by hand 30 years earlier. The thermometer beside the kitchen window had read 19 degrees before Claire opened the door. I remember that clearly because I had been thinking the pipes might freeze if Andrew forgot to leave the cabinet under the sink cracked open. Even then, with my suitcase on the porch and my winter coat missing from the hall closet, I was still thinking about their comfort. "Andrew," I said, not loudly, not even angrily, just his name. He lifted his eyes for half a second, and that was enough. There was shame there, yes, but not enough courage to cross the room. Claire gave a small sigh, the kind people use when they want to make your pain sound inconvenient. "Please don't make this dramatic. There's a motel off Route 31. You have your purse." My purse held $43, a pharmacy receipt, a church bulletin, and a photo of Harold from our last anniversary, smiling beside the lake in his red flannel shirt. I looked at my son again, waiting for the boy who used to run into my arms after Little League games, the boy whose fevers I had sat through, the boy I had raised after every hard winter and every overdue bill. But that boy was gone, or maybe buried somewhere beneath a man who had learned silence from marriage. "I see," I said. That was all. I did not beg. I did not accuse. I picked up the suitcase handle with fingers already stiff from the cold and stepped down from the porch. The door closed before I reached the bottom step. The sound of the lock turning behind me was small, almost polite, but it landed in my chest like the final period at the end of a life I thought belonged to me. I walked because standing still would have made me cry, and I was not ready to give Claire that picture. Snow gathered on my hair, on my eyelashes, on the shoulders of my thin cardigan. My shoes slipped twice on the sidewalk, but I kept moving past dark houses glowing with other people's dinners, other people's families, other people's ordinary mercy. At the end of Pine Hollow Road, near the old gas station that had been closed since the pandemic, I saw a pickup truck half on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking red into the storm. An older man stood beside it, looking down at a flat tire, one hand braced on the door as if his knee was troubling him. I should have kept walking. Any sensible woman my age, put out in the snow with nowhere to go, would have kept her strength for herself. But Harold had taught me how to change a tire on our honeymoon after we blew one outside Kalamazoo, and old habits of usefulness are hard to kill. "You'll want to set the jack farther under the frame," I called, my voice thin in the wind. The man turned, surprised. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be out in this weather." "Neither should you," I said, and for the first time that night, I almost smiled. Together, slowly, we got the jack placed right. He loosened the lug nuts while I held the flashlight from my purse, the beam shaking in my cold hand, but staying where he needed it. When the spare was finally on, he straightened, breathing hard, and the light from the truck caught my face. He stared at me for a long moment, not with pity, but with recognition so sharp it seemed to stop the snow between us. Then he said a name no one had called me in more than 50 years. "Maggie Rose." My heart forgot the cold. I looked past the gray beard, past the lines around his eyes, and saw a football jacket, a homecoming dance, a boy leaning against a blue Chevy outside Traverse City High in 1970. "Bobby Hayes," I whispered. And just like that, the night Claire thought would end me opened a door I never knew was still waiting. Bobby did not ask why I was outside with a suitcase. That was the first kindness he gave me. He opened the passenger door of his pickup, turned the heat as high as it would go, and placed my suitcase carefully behind the seat as if it held something valuable instead of 2 sweaters, a nightgown, and the few photographs Claire had not thrown into a box marked storage. My hands shook so badly I could barely fasten the seat belt. Bobby noticed, but he looked away long enough to let me keep my dignity. "There is a diner still open on 8th Street, he said. "They make coffee strong enough to wake the lake." I nodded because I did not trust my voice. As the truck rolled through the snowy streets of Traverse City, the windshield wipers moving back and forth like a tired clock. I watched familiar houses pass in silence and wondered when my own home had stopped being mine. It had not happened all at once. That is the part people never understand. No one wakes up one morning and finds herself erased. First, Claire moved my wedding portrait from the mantel to the hallway because she said the living room needed to feel less sad. Then Harold's recliner disappeared while I was at a church luncheon. She said the fabric smelled old, and Andrew had agreed it was time. After that, my good china was packed away to make room for Claire's white ceramic dishes, the ones she said looked cleaner on social media. Every change came wrapped in a reasonable voice. Every insult wore perfume. After Harold passed, I had tried to be grateful that Andrew wanted me to stay in the house. He was my only child, and I believe grief had made him quiet. Claire called it adjustment. She said young families needed space to breathe, even though she and Andrew had no children and the house had 4 bedrooms. She began referring to my bedroom as the guest room when people visited. She placed my mail in a basket by the garage door instead of on the kitchen counter. She asked me to label my groceries so there would be no confusion, though I had bought food for that family for decades. Little by little, I became a visitor who paid no rent but owed everyone an apology for existing. Andrew saw it. I know he did. Sometimes he would pause in the doorway when Claire corrected me, his face tight with discomfort. Once, when she told me not to use the front bathroom because guests might stop by, he opened his mouth as if he might finally say something. Then Claire looked at him, just looked, and he closed it again. That silence became the language of our house. By the time Bobby pulled into the diner parking lot and helped me step over the icy curb, I had stopped asking myself why Claire disliked me. The better question was why my son had allowed her dislike to become law. Inside, the diner smelled of coffee, fried potatoes, and wet wool. Bobby guided me to a booth near the heater, then slid into the seat across from me with the same careful gentleness he had shown that flat tire. Under the bright lights, I could see the boy he had been and the man life had made of him. Maggie, he said softly, using my old name as if it had been waiting safely in his pocket for 50 years. You do not have to explain tonight, but you do have to get warm. That was when my eyes finally burned, not because I had been thrown out, but because someone had noticed I was cold. The waitress brought coffee in thick white mugs and a bowl of chicken noodle soup Bobby ordered before I could pretend I was not hungry. I wrapped both hands around the mug and let the steam rise into my face. Across the table, Bobby waited with the patience of a man who had learned that some stories must come out slowly or not at all. I watched snow slide down the diner window in soft white streaks, and the memory that came to me first was not the suitcase or the locked door. It was Claire standing in my kitchen 3 weeks earlier with her phone tucked against her shoulder, smiling in a way that did not reach her eyes. I had been in the laundry room folding towels when I heard her say, "The lake view is the selling point. Once we clear out the older furniture, buyers will see the potential." At first, I thought she was talking about one of her decorating clients. Claire had a talent for making other people feel unfashionable in their own homes. Then she lowered her voice and said, "Spring would be perfect. Andrew thinks the paperwork is simple. His mother will not make trouble. His mother. Not Maggie. Not Mom. Not even Margaret Bennett. Just an obstacle with gray hair and a prescription organizer on the bathroom counter." I stood there holding one of Harold's old bath towels, the green one with the frayed edge, and felt the house tilt quietly around me. That evening, I asked Andrew if he and Claire had been thinking about selling. He looked startled, then tired, then guilty in that order. "Mom, nothing is decided," he said. Those 3 words told me everything. Nothing is decided means decisions are already being made in rooms where you are no longer invited. Claire walked in before I could ask another question, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea as if she had not been listening from the hallway. She smiled and touched Andrew's shoulder. "Your mother worries too much," she said. At her age, change feels frightening. At her age, Claire had learned to make every sentence sound like concern while slipping a blade of insult beneath it. Andrew did not correct her. He took the iced tea. He looked down. After that, I began noticing papers disappearing from the kitchen drawer where Harold had always kept household records. Property tax notices, insurance envelopes, bank statements, even the folder marked trust documents that I had never fully understood because Harold had handled those things and told me not to worry. I had believed him. Marriage can make trust feel practical until the person you trusted is gone and someone else starts moving your life around in labeled boxes. One morning, I found my car keys missing from the hook by the back door. Claire said she had put them somewhere safe because the roads were icy and she would hate for anything to happen. She said it sweetly, while sliding her phone into her pocket, and I saw a message flash across the screen from a realtor named Denise. I did not read it. I did not need to. By then, the pattern had become clear enough to touch. Claire did not want a peaceful household. She wanted possession. She wanted the lake view, the square footage, the polished floors Harold and I had saved years to install. Most of all, she wanted me to leave without making Andrew feel like the kind of son who would let his mother be pushed out. In the diner, Bobby listened without interrupting, his coffee untouched. When I finished, he leaned back slowly, and something changed in his face. It was not pity. It was recognition. "Maggie," he said, careful and low. "Did Harold ever tell you what he signed before he passed?" I looked at him over the rim of my mug, my fingers tightening around the warm ceramic. "What do you mean?" Bobby glanced toward the snowy parking lot, then back at me. "I mean your daughter-in-law may have been planning around papers she has never actually seen." I stared at Bobby while the diner heater hummed beside our booth and the spoon in my soup slowly sank out of sight. Harold had signed many things during his last year: insurance forms, hospital papers, bank updates, documents I had trusted him to handle because he had always been the steady one with numbers and folders and careful blue ink. "He told me the house would be protected," I said, but I thought he meant Andrew would do right by me. Bobby's mouth tightened, not with anger exactly, but with the sadness of someone hearing a familiar song played wrong. "Harold loved Andrew," he said, "but he was not blind." Those words carried me back to the final winter of my marriage, when Harold sat at the kitchen table in his robe with a blanket over his knees, pretending to read the newspaper while watching Claire move through our house like she was measuring it for someone else. She would pause in doorways, glance at ceiling beams, comment on how the old wallpaper made the dining room feel smaller. Harold never argued with her. He only watched. One afternoon, after she left, he reached for my hand and said, "Maggie, promise me you will not sign anything unless Paul Mercer reads it first." Paul Mercer had been our family attorney for 28 years. I laughed softly then, because I thought Harold was worrying over nothing. "What would I sign?" I asked. He looked toward the window, where Lake Michigan was gray and restless beyond the trees. "People change when they start counting what is not theirs yet." I did not want to hear that about our son. No mother does. So I kissed his forehead, adjusted his blanket, and told myself illness made a man fearful. Now, sitting across from Bobby with snow melting from my shoes onto the diner floor, I understood that Harold had not been fearful. He had been prepared. Before I could ask more, my phone buzzed inside my purse. The screen showed Andrew's name. For one foolish second, my heart lifted. I thought maybe he had come to his senses. Maybe he had opened the door, seen the empty porch, and remembered I was his mother. I answered without speaking. Claire's voice came through instead, smooth and bright. "Maggie, I hope you found somewhere warm. Andrew is very upset, so please do not call him directly tonight." I looked at Bobby. He went still. "I am safe," I said. "Good," Claire replied, and I could hear cabinet doors closing in the background. "My cabinets. My kitchen. We will leave your remaining things in the garage tomorrow. It is better if we all have space. You know how confused and emotional things have been for you lately." There it was. The little net she had been weaving for months. Confused. Emotional. Too old for keys. Too forgetful for the stove. Too fragile for decisions. I remembered the dish towel Claire claimed I had left too close to a burner, though I had not cooked that morning. I remembered the pill bottle moved to the wrong shelf, the missed doctor appointment she said I had forgotten even though she had changed the time. I remembered Andrew looking at me with concern that did not belong to him, concern Claire had planted and watered. "I am not confused," I said quietly. Claire paused. Only a second, but I heard it. "Of course," she said. "Get some rest." The call ended. I placed the phone on the table, face down. My hands were no longer shaking. Bobby reached into his coat pocket and took out a business card, then turned it over and wrote a number on the back. "Paul Mercer still has an office on Front Street," he said, "and I know because Harold asked me to sit in that office as a witness 3 years ago." The diner seemed to grow very quiet around us. "A witness to what?" I asked. Bobby slid the card across the table. To the document that says that house stays yours as long as you are alive, and anyone who tries to force you out loses every claim Harold meant to leave them. I did not sleep that night, not in the way people mean when they say sleep. Bobby brought me to the small guest room above his garage office, a clean room with a quilt folded at the foot of the bed and a window facing a row of pine trees silvered by snow. He set a fresh toothbrush and a folded towel on the dresser, then stepped back into the hallway before I could feel embarrassed by needing them. My sister keeps this room ready for visiting cousins, he said. No one will bother you here. After he left, I sat on the edge of the bed in my damp shoes and looked at my suitcase standing near the door like a tired little witness. Everything I had with me could fit into one hand, yet somehow I felt less homeless in that room than I had felt in my own kitchen for months. At 6:30 in the morning, Bobby knocked softly and left coffee outside my door. By 8, he had driven me to Paul Mercer's office on Front Street, where the sidewalks had been shoveled into narrow white walls and the bay looked hard and gray beyond the buildings. Paul was older than I remembered, with thinner hair and the same careful eyes. When he saw me, his expression changed before he spoke. Not surprise. Confirmation. "Margaret," he said, standing from behind his desk. "I am sorry it has come to this." Those words told me Bobby had called ahead. I lowered myself into the leather chair across from him while Bobby remained near the door, quiet, respectful, present without taking over. Paul opened a file thick enough to make my stomach tighten. Harold's name was printed on the tab in black ink. Harold Bennett Family Trust. For years, that phrase had sounded like something distant and legal, a thing meant for after I was gone. Paul turned pages slowly, explaining each. One in plain English. The house was not Andrew's. It had never been Andrew's. Harold had placed it in trust with me as the lifetime beneficiary, which meant I had the right to live there, control access, approve repairs, and decide what happened to it while I was alive. Andrew's inheritance was conditional. He was to receive certain assets only if he respected my residence, my independence, and my legal rights. If he or anyone acting with him tried to pressure me out, restrict my access, hide financial notices, or represent the property as his own, his claim could be suspended. I heard the words, but I kept staring at Harold's signature. The blue ink curved exactly the way his hand had moved over birthday cards and grocery lists and little notes he left by the coffee maker. He had been protecting me while I was busy pretending there was nothing to fear. Paul slid another sheet across the desk. There is more. Someone requested copies of property documents twice in the past 6 months. Not you. Not Andrew directly. A woman identifying herself as a family representative. Claire. Her name did not need to be spoken to enter the room. I thought of her soft voice on the phone, her labeled boxes, her careful concern. For the first time, I did not feel small beneath it. I felt awake. Paul asked if I wanted to return to the house immediately with formal notice. I looked out the window at the snow piled against the curb. Going back would have been my right. But rights and peace are not always found in the same room. Not today, I said. First, I want every document copied. I want every access point reviewed. I want a full list of what has been removed from that house since Harold died. Paul nodded and began writing. Bobby looked at me then, and there was something like pride in his eyes, quiet and warm. My hands rested steady in my lap. Claire had sent me into the snow with one suitcase, believing I would search for mercy. Instead, by morning, I had found the paper trail Harold left behind, and every page had my name on it. For the next 2 days, I let Claire believe the cold had made me quiet. That was easy because she never understood silence unless she owned it. Paul Mercer advised me not to answer her messages except through his office, so I watched them appear on my phone like little performances written for an audience of one. The first said she hoped I was feeling calmer. The second said Andrew was heartbroken by my behavior. The third asked where I had put the spare key to the cedar chest in the upstairs hall, as if a woman who had been locked out in the snow should still provide convenient access to her memories. I did not reply. Instead, I sat in Bobby's office above Hayes Auto and towing while Paul's assistant scanned documents, made calls, and built a record with the patience of someone stacking stones for a wall. The paper trail grew faster than I expected. The realtor had visited twice. A moving company had given Claire an estimate for removing dated furnishings. A local antique shop had already purchased Harold's roll-top desk, the one he used every April to sort tax receipts while humming old Johnny Cash songs. Claire had signed the receipt as household manager. I looked at that phrase for a long time. Household manager. It was a clean title for theft of meaning, if not yet theft in the legal sense. Bobby found the desk by calling a friend who knew the shop owner. He did not make a scene. He simply bought it back and had it delivered to a storage unit in my name. When he handed me the receipt, I ran my thumb over Harold's name written in pencil under one drawer, where he had marked a repair years ago. It felt like touching his hand through wood. On the third afternoon, Andrew finally called from his own phone. I was sitting by the window of Bobby's office, watching mechanics roll tires through the slush below. "Mom," he said, and the word came out thin. "Claire says you are making this harder than it needs to be." I closed my eyes. There it was again. Claire says. Not I think. Not I am sorry. Not where are you sleeping. What do you say, Andrew? I asked. Silence filled the line, heavy and familiar. Then he sighed. I say we all need to be practical. Practical. That word had become a shovel in my family, used to bury anything tender. Did you know she had a realtor in my house? I asked. He hesitated just long enough. We were exploring options. Did you know she sold your father's desk? This time, the silence changed. It loosened. What? He whispered. For the first time in months, I heard my son instead of Claire's echo. But grief had taught me not to mistake a crack for an open door. Ask your wife? I said, and ended the call before he could hand me another excuse. That evening, Claire posted a photograph of my living room online. The caption read, "New chapter. New house. No more dead weight." She deleted it 17 minutes later, but Bobby's receptionist had already printed it, timestamp and all. I placed the page into Paul's folder myself. My fingers were steady. I was not gathering revenge. I was gathering the truth, and for once, the truth had receipts. By Friday morning, Claire had stopped pretending to be concerned and started pretending to be generous. Her message came through just after breakfast while Bobby was downstairs opening the garage bays, and I was sitting at the small office table with a legal pad in front of me. Maggie, Andrew and I think it would be best if we meet somewhere neutral. We are willing to help you transition into a more suitable place, but you need to cooperate. I read this sentence twice, not because it confused me, but because it sounded exactly like Claire. She could turn being cruel into sounding organized. She could put a ribbon around a locked door and call it a boundary. I forwarded the message to Paul Mercer and set the phone down. Outside the window, a tow truck backed into the lot, its yellow lights flashing through the pale winter morning. Men in heavy jackets moved through the snow with tools in their hands, each of them knowing what belonged where and what needed fixing. For the first time in days, I felt the strange comfort of being around honest work. Paul called 10 minutes later. I want them at North Shore Community Bank at 2 o'clock, he said. Not my office. The trust accounts are there, and the manager should be present. His voice remained calm, but there was steel under it. Do not tell Claire why. Tell her you are prepared to discuss paperwork. I looked at Bobby, who had come upstairs carrying a box of old files Harold had once left with him. Paperwork, I repeated. Bobby gave a faint smile. That is a word people like Claire trust too much. I sent the message. Claire replied within 3 minutes. Fine. Bring identification. We need this finished. I could almost see her standing in my kitchen, pleased with herself, imagining me signing away my place in the world because the snow had frightened me. That afternoon, before the meeting, Bobby drove me to a small clothing shop on Front Street because my suitcase held nothing suitable for a bank conference room. I chose a navy wool dress, simple and warm, and a gray coat with a collar that sat high against my neck. When I looked in the dressing room mirror, I did not see a woman rescued by an old sweetheart. I saw Harold's wife, Andrew's mother, Margaret Rose Bennett, who had forgotten for a little while that softness and weakness are not the same thing. Bobby waited near the register, hands folded over the top of his cane. You look like you are about to tell the truth, he said. No, I answered, fastening the top button of the coat. I am about to let the truth introduce itself. We arrived at the bank 20 minutes early. Paul was already there with his assistant and a folder so full it no longer closed flat. The bank manager, a woman named Mrs. Whitaker, greeted me with both hands around mine. Mrs. Bennett, I am sorry for the circumstances, she said. I had never met her before, but she knew my name because Harold had made sure the right people would know it when it mattered. At 2 sharp, Andrew and Claire walked in. Andrew looked tired, his face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. Claire looked polished in a cream coat and leather gloves, carrying a folder of her own as if she had come to manage a problem. Her eyes moved from me to Bobby, then to Paul, and for the first time, her smile faltered. "Why is he here?" she asked. Bobby did not answer. He only pulled out a chair for me. I sat down slowly, placed my purse on the table, and watched Claire realize that the woman she had put into the snow had not come back alone. Claire remained standing for a moment too long, her leather gloves still on, her folder pressed against her chest like a shield. Andrew sat first. He did not look at me. He looked at the polished table, at Paul Mercer's hands, at the bank manager's nameplate, anywhere except the mother he had left outside in winter. Claire finally lowered herself into the chair beside him and gave Paul a tight smile. "I assume we are here to discuss a reasonable living arrangement for Maggie," she said. "She has had a difficult week." Paul opened his folder. The sound of paper sliding against paper seemed louder than it should have been. "We are here to discuss the Harold Bennett Family Trust, the residence on Pine Hollow Road, and several documented attempts to interfere with Mrs. Bennett's rights as lifetime beneficiary." Claire blinked once. Only once. Andrew looked up. "Lifetime beneficiary?" he asked. His voice had the lost quality of a man hearing the first crack in a story he had believed because believing it had been easier. Paul turned a copy toward him. "Your father placed the house in trust. Your mother has the legal right to occupy, control, and manage that property for the rest of her life. Your inheritance is conditional, not automatic." Claire gave a little laugh, soft and polished. "That is not how Andrew understood it." "Then Andrew misunderstood," Paul said. He did not raise his voice. That made it worse for her. Mrs. Whitaker opened another folder and placed 2 bank notices on the table. These were mailed to Mrs. Bennett at the home address. Both were returned through internal handling with a request to send future trust correspondence to an alternate contact. Claire's face changed by a shade. Not enough for a stranger to notice, but I noticed. I had watched her manage expressions for years. "I handle household mail," she said. "Maggie gets overwhelmed." I looked at Andrew then. "Did I seem overwhelmed when I balanced your father's medical bills for 16 months? Did I seem overwhelmed when I found a way to keep that house after you lost your job in 2008 and moved back into your old room?" His mouth opened, then closed. Claire touched his sleeve. "This is exactly what I mean." She gets emotional and starts dragging up the past. Bobby leaned forward slightly, speaking for the first time. "The past is where receipts live." Paul placed the antique shop receipt on the table next, then the moving estimate, then the realtor appointment confirmation, then the printed photograph of my living room with Claire's caption beneath it. "New chapter. New house. No more deadweight." The words sat there under the fluorescent bank lights, stripped of timing and tone and all her little excuses. Andrew reached for the page slowly. His hand trembled. "Claire," he whispered, "you posted this?" Claire stared at the paper as if it had betrayed her by existing. It was taken out of context. Paul slid one final document forward. Mrs. Bennett was removed from the residence during severe winter weather and denied immediate access to her coat, transportation, and remaining personal property. Mr. Hayes is a witness to her condition shortly afterward. Under the trust terms, that event alone is enough to trigger review of your conditional interest, Andrew. Andrew looked at me then, really looked, and I saw the boy for one painful second. Not innocent, not forgiven, but awake. "Mom," he said. Claire turned on him sharply. "Do not." That was when he finally pulled his arm away from her hand. The movement was small, quiet, years late. But it happened. Paul capped his pen and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Bennett, as of this morning, your authority over the property has been reaffirmed. Andrew's access to trust-related accounts is suspended pending review. No sale, listing, removal of property, or transfer may occur without your written approval." I folded my hands in my lap. Claire's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. For all her planning, she had made one mistake. She thought throwing me out would make me disappear. Instead, it put me in the one room where every locked door could be opened by paper, witnesses, and the name Harold had never let them take from me. No one in that bank conference room shouted after Paul finished speaking. The quiet was heavier than shouting would have been. Claire gathered her papers with hands that had lost their elegance, tapping the edges against the table though they were already straight. Andrew kept staring at the printed caption, as if the words might soften if he looked long enough. They did not. Deadweight. That was what his wife had called me in the room where Harold had taught our son to build model airplanes. In the house, where I had baked every birthday cake he ever blew candles from as a boy. Finally, Andrew pushed the paper away and covered his face with both hands. "Mom, I am sorry," he said. The words came too late, but they came from somewhere real, and that made them hurt more. I looked at him, my only child, with his father's eyes and a stranger's weakness. "I believe you are sorry now," I said. "But sorrow after consequences is not the same as courage before harm." Claire stood so quickly her chair scraped against the floor. "This is ridiculous. You are letting her manipulate you." Andrew looked up at her, and for once, he did not ask what she meant. He simply said, "You sold Dad's desk." Claire's mouth tightened. She turned toward me with that familiar expression, the one she used when she wanted me to feel old, small, and in the way. But this time, it had nowhere to land. I was seated between my attorney and a witness who remembered me before I was anybody's mother, before I was anybody's widow, before grief taught me to shrink. Paul informed them that a formal notice would be delivered that afternoon. The locks would be changed legally. My remaining belongings would be inventoried. Anything removed would be accounted for. Claire left first, her heels clicking down the bank hallway in a rhythm too fast to sound confident. Andrew stayed behind. "Can I come by and talk to you?" he asked. I thought of the porch, the cold, the lock turning. I thought of his silence behind Claire's shoulder. "Not yet," I said. His face fell, but he nodded. That was the first respectful thing he had done in a long time. I had every right to move back into the house on Pine Hollow Road, and for one day I thought I might. Bobby drove me there the following morning after Paul arranged everything. The winter sun was bright over the snow, and the house looked almost innocent from the driveway. Inside, my room smelled the same, lemon polish and old wood, but something had changed. Or maybe I had. I walked past the mantel, past the empty place where Harold's desk had been, past the kitchen where Claire had practiced concern like a script. I stood in the living room and waited for longing to pull me back. It did not. What I felt was gratitude for what had been and release from what it had become. Within 3 months, with Paul's help, I turned the house into a temporary residence for older women who needed a safe place while they rebuilt their lives. I named it the Harold Bennett House because Harold had protected me on paper, and now that protection would shelter someone else. Andrew began visiting on Sundays, not as an owner, not as a decision maker, but as a son learning how to sit across from his mother without excuses. Claire was gone by spring. I did not ask where. Bobby still stops by most mornings with coffee from the diner on 8th Street. We walk near the bay when the sidewalks are clear, two old people moving slowly, saying only what needs saying. I do not know what name to give that kind of peace. I only know that on the night Claire sent me into the snow, she thought she was closing a door behind me. What she really did was push me back toward my own life. And this time, I walked into it with my head high.